All right, we'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Saval, President and CEO of Saval Food Service. Thank you for remoting into our panel discussion today. I first want to quickly announce the second winner of our $1,000 scavenger hunt giveaway. The winner of the Friday scavenger hunt was Carter Q. Congratulations. And to those of you who entered, you will have 2 more chances to win starting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'd like to welcome Kathy Hollinger, the president of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, and Marshall Weston, the president and CEO of the Maryland Restaurant Association, to our panel today. These 2 leaders have become the main sources of information for our industry, as well as major influencers of government policy in Maryland, the District of Columbia, and Virginia. Many of you may have seen Marshall representing our industry at the Governor of Maryland's press conference 2 weeks ago. He did a great job. And both Marshall and Kathy have been incredible communicators to the restaurant community through email and social media. And we're honored they agreed to spend time with us today. Kathy and Marshall, thank you for being with us today. It's been quite a year, and it seems like the restaurant industry has been and continues to be a main target and one of the biggest victims during the pandemic. So for those of us or listening in that have not been members of the Restaurant Association of Maryland or the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, can you give us a snapshot of what your organizations do? Marshall, tell us about RAM.
Thanks, Paul. And I would like to say that I really commend Saval Food Service for putting this forum together. I think that as everybody is running around and kind of just desperate to run their businesses and survive this pandemic, there's not enough opportunity to have conversations and learn from other people. So thank you for doing this. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things we're trying to do at the Restaurant Association of Maryland is that we understand there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of speculation, and there's just an overwhelming amount of anxiety on the part of business owners and their employees. So we spend a lot of time going through information and publishing the right information the first time. We don't necessarily run out and put something up first. We put it out correct. And with 24 different jurisdictions in Maryland, sometimes all doing the same thing, oftentimes doing things differently, and there are nuances because county executives decide to maybe be a little bit more restrictive than the governor. It becomes very confusing. So we've spent a lot of time during this COVID pandemic, not only advocating to local elected officials and the governor about the role of restaurants, but also publishing information so that businesses can make very good decisions. And I'm sure, Kathy, you probably do a lot of the same things.
Yeah. Kathy, tell us about RAMW.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I for sure to echo Marshall's points, want to thank you for putting this group together and panel together. You know, we are a regional trade association. We're mostly DC. We have Northern Virginia operators and suburban Maryland operators, but we work very much in collaboration with Marshall in the state of Maryland and our colleague in Virginia. But look, the reality is that we're traditionally a trade association that's rooted in legislative advocacy, educational and training programs, required and otherwise, marketing programs that we develop to create traffic, butts and seats for our restaurants. We're about 1,200 plus members at this time, and they're largely small and independently owned businesses, whether on the restaurant operator side or on the allied member side. And since March, it's a lot of what Marshall said. You know, there's a lot to navigate. There's a lot to sort through. And one thing we've been very clear about is that we're not going to have the answers to everything, but we're going to at least help you navigate and guide a really uncertain time. A lot of our communication was rooted in what you need to know right now at this moment and what you may need to know next week, because that is what well, that's where we are. We're trying to get through the day to day right now as an industry that's been really, really hit hard by this pandemic.
Mhm. So to follow up, Kathy, so I think this would be a great interest to our audience of independent restaurateurs. And now it's front page news in every newspaper that Congress is progressing towards a much delayed and needed stimulus package. Can you give us what you know at this time, and what do you think?
Yes, I can definitely share what I know. And Marshall, I ask you to join me in that because there's a lot of unknown. I mean, we're hoping that this week there's some round of relief that comes from Congress to our industry specifically, maybe to include another round of PPP. But we know that it's critical and that we need it. And all of the smaller relief efforts that are in place across the region, which have been wonderful, are not enough to be able to get the industry through the colder months, but really get them in a position to be even able to rethink or think about reopening, recovering, resetting. So we're hopeful that this week allows for some kind of good news that gives our industry some relief going into the colder months. But as you have all seen, every day is a crapshoot. And we'll have to kind of see where we are at the end of that day.
And so, Marshall, I've been reading, do you have any details as to how this stimulus would impact our industry positively or not?
As Kathy said, there are so many different things at play and so many things change. And I think the sentiment from most every restaurateur that I speak to is that the federal government has let them down. And, we have to acknowledge that politics have become a big part of these stimulus packages. And that's really unfortunate because we have, restaurants that are closing on a daily basis, right? But if you're on this call today, you're not going to let that happen to you. That's why you're here, right? You want to make sure you're not one of those. But the reality is that we need some help from the federal government. And although they keep talking about different programs and different ways to do things, we have to remember that although our industry may be one of the top 3 that have been impacted, there are lots of other industries as well. So that's why there's lots of negotiating when it comes to these federal packages. But we clearly don't love the idea of the PPP program. I know a lot of restaurateurs took advantage of that early on this year, and it wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. But the reality is that it might be that because it is an existing program, it might be the only thing we get in the very near future, and we may just have to accept that. At least it will be something. I think getting something is more important than getting nothing. And at this point in time, the idea of getting a big pot of money that's just going to flow directly to restaurants is probably unreasonable to believe that's going to happen. So Kathy and I and all the other state restaurant associations work collaboratively with the National Restaurant Association, who is taking the lead and convincing Congress that we really need help. But I think everybody needs to know that we almost on a daily basis are pushing the federal government to do something to help our industry so that we're here next year and even next month.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the last round of PPP probably came out a little too early. Yes, we shut down in March, but so did the restaurants. They had to shut down. So basically they had no employees. So they were applying for money to get employees. The federal government was trying to get employees back to work, but if you put them back to work too early and you had no business, you ran out of that money. So depending on what the strategy was of the restaurateur, hold on to the money and don't open until I absolutely have to and know that there'll be some income coming in. And those that did that probably were better off than those who spent it to be nice and get the employees right back to work. Being nice or whatever, I guess that's the wrong word, but so, I think that in the summer, we knew that if there wasn't another pump of money in September, that there'd be trouble. And I think because Congress didn't come through then, restaurants kind of skated along because the weather was okay. And then when the weather started turning the other way and restrictions came back, now you don't have any PPP money left. You have really very, not a real good foreseeable future in short term. So now is the time. And now is the time. So what's the strategy of the restaurateur now when they get the money? Do they close for January and February and then reopen in March? Do they stick it out? Kathy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's, I wish it was as easy as offering one recommendation to, the industry at large. But yes, the first attempt at PPP, was ambitious. It was not thought through. But a lot of things weren't thought through. We didn't know how long this was going to last. We thought we were going to be in a very different place in like June or July.
Right.
And again, it required a lot of finessing and editing and amending. But I do think that what PPP, there are a lot of negatives with PPP in general in terms of whether it works or not. But what it would allow right now is for an operator to make a choice that works best for them. And if that means I'm going to hibernate for a couple months because that is the best way to stop the bleeding internally, then it gives them a little bit of flexibility to do that. I think the biggest challenge right now, and Marshall, you probably hear this a lot, is that our people just feel that they're in limbo. They do not know what to do. And yes, they care so much about their people and don't want to go back through the laying off of the people that they just secured, mind you, at maybe 20% of the workforce that they had. So they need some certainty. And the local relief is not the certainty that they need. They might get a grant here, a grant there, some whole patch relief, but they do need something from the federal government from Congress to allow them to pause and think about what the heck am I going to do for the next 2 months? And then I can maybe rethink and reset going into late winter, early spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think uncertainty is the theme of the last 9 months, right?
Right.
Nobody knows when this is going to end, what's going to happen. The vaccine gives us some hope, but it's still going to be a dark, dark winter. I heard Senator Cardin speak last night, and he talked about one thing that may be very important, and that is the PPP forgiveness piece, which is so controversial and so up in the air with the new questionnaire and and again, people don't know whether they're going to be able to keep all that money or not. He thought that there was a bipartisan agreement for forgiveness. And if that would be a prerequisite to the new influx of PPP, that would give some certainty to the restaurateur that, yeah, this is my money. I'm not going to have to give it back. And I can go forward and get more money. And the old money is not going to impact my ability to get the new money. Does anybody, Marshall, you hear anything about the overlap? Because I know that my next question was going to be on the local government side. There's funding, limited, but there's funding. But I know that that's been an impediment. The federal funds have been an impediment to seeking local funds. That because you received it from the federal government, you can't get it from the local government. So if you can talk about those couple of things, I appreciate it. Marshall, you want to start?
Yeah, and again, it's just back to this uncertainty and everything is so unclear. And that is the frustration that's really just palpable among everyone, is that, there seems to be this pot of money coming from the state that comes from the local jurisdictions, at least here in Maryland. And then some restaurateurs find out that a decision was made within that jurisdiction because you received PPP back in May, that you're not eligible for this money. the idea that, this money is that you receive from PPP is not going to be deductible. That is problematic. So, the idea that this is going to be smooth and easy, I think people gave up on that idea a long time ago. And it's probably rightfully so, because with your business at stake, you cannot be taking chances on whether or not something's going to work or come through. And yeah, the state and local grants are helpful, but they're clearly not enough, as Kathy said. So it really is going to take the federal government stepping in and doing something very significant to give the peace of mind to restaurateurs. Now, when and if that comes, nobody seems to know. So you kind of go back to your original thought. How does a restaurateur make a decision about what to do over the next couple months? That is why we so desperately need an answer as to, within the next week to 10 days, what we're going to be able to expect. And perfect or not, at least it gives the business owner some choice as to how to proceed. But right now, nobody knows what the right answer is, and that makes it very difficult. And unfortunately, we'd love to sit up here and tell you, what you should do. You should do this 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll all be fine.
Yeah,
I can't even give you 1 out of 4 things to do right now, and I realize that that's frustrating, and it frustrates the employees here at RAM. And we work hard every single day to try to get the best information and do what we can to keep this industry afloat. But unfortunately, it's out of our control a little bit when it comes to these expectations of what we can provide. So
very good. Kathy, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that, the other piece to consider is that, to Marshall's point, it's very hard to give guidance, but also understand that those who have the jobs in our cities and states, and for sure running the country, to offer guidance, they're also coming to us asking us for guidance, which, I joke with some that I find it amusing, but it also speaks to the reality of where we are. And that is that none of us have had to deal with this before. And we're all trying to figure this out together to find a path forward. And while certain things are introduced, they are mostly introduced and put forward with the right intention, but not necessarily the wisdom and the insight and the detail, because we have to somewhat live and learn as we're going through this. In terms of relief, one thing that we've all been pushing across the country, all of the state restaurant associations, yes, the National Restaurant Association, but it's basically apply for everything. Get anything and everything that you can, period. Mm-hmm. Just try to get it, because we know that there's never going to be enough. We know that there is not enough relief out there, even if, Congress were to give us some kind of bailout. The reality is that we need more, and we're an industry that already operates on incredibly thin profit margin. We're trying to rework the system. We have these allowances of how we can operate versus how we can't operate. And we're trying to figure all of this out, and it all costs a lot of money. I mean, just think about packaging, takeout and delivery. That's a lot of money. But they're trying to keep this moving. Restaurants are just trying to bring in anything in terms of revenue every single day that is more than what they wouldn't bring in. But at some point, it is a business decision. Does it make sense to continue to operate in this way versus stepping back and preparing for how I may need to operate down the road? And again, that is not something that Marshall and I can tell an operator to do, but at a minimum, go out there and get all the relief that is out there to be able to make a better and more informed decision.
Paul, if you could add on that.
Yes, go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, I think to go along with that idea is you have to be willing to completely disregard everything that you've done and how you've run your business for the previous however many years. And those operators that are willing to try something new, the operators that figured out by the time May 1st rolled around that, oh my goodness, this isn't going to go away. I have to figure out how to do carry out, but we've never really done it before because we're a traditional sit down restaurant. You needed to figure that out. You needed to figure out outdoor dining. You needed to figure out just maybe upgrades in technology to make things work. And if you as a business owner are unwilling to change and to try something new, to just take a chance and just see what works, if you're not willing to do that, you're probably going to continue to struggle. And I get it. We are all struggling. Everybody is struggling, no doubt. But you've got to think about what does it mean to run a restaurant tomorrow rather than how I ran it this time last year, because things, we have no idea what they're going to look like. So, hopefully we're all going to learn from each other, and the public's going to have changes in attitudes. And, this is all going to be almost just kind of a reinvention of the restaurant industry for years to come. And I think it starts with the restaurateur's attitude is you got to do what it takes right now to save your business, but also be thinking about what it means for tomorrow and a month from now.
I thought yesterday, I think it was on CBS Sunday Morning or 60 Minutes, they talked about evictions. And so it's one thing we really don't talk a lot about, but a lot of what the restaurants face have to do a lot with how their landlords are treating them. And landlords are in business too, but I wonder, have you heard anything as to landlords that have been tremendously generous? Are there landlords that are deferring rent? Are they relieving rent? What's going on there? First in Maryland, then I'll talk about DC, because DC, I guess, was one of the hottest markets in the country until March, especially in the real estate realm. Go ahead, you start, Marshall.
Yeah, and we see the same thing here in Maryland. It's not cheap to do business in this region, right? Rents are extremely high. And when restaurants are doing well, those rents can, they're not as problematic. I have heard many stories of landlords that have been willing to work with the operators, push things to the back end until we get through all of this. There are plenty of those stories to go around. And I would suspect if those things were not happening, then we would see 75% of our restaurants shut down, because it is an enormous expense, the overhead necessary to run a restaurant, right? So, but I have heard stories, and I am familiar with some cases where the landlords just were not as accommodating as you would think that they'd want to be. And the restaurant is put in a very difficult position. And I know of restaurants that have decided to close down, and maybe they'll open up someplace else later. Maybe they won't open up again. It remains to be seen. But I would say that the overwhelming number of restaurants have had to have already worked with their landlords by this point. So that is certainly encouraging, and that leads me to believe that we are all in this together. But unfortunately, you do hear too many stories about landlords just saying the rent is due, and the restaurant chooses to close, and that's really sad. So I am hopeful that we're all learning some valuable lessons here. And for all of the people that want to open a restaurant in the future, Kathy and I and our associations have talked about this all the time, but it never gets enough play. Your rent agreement, your lease agreement has got to be looked at by several people, very thoughtful, and it's a very important part of your business, because it's not a problem until it's a problem. And you got to do your homework up front. So.
Yep.
Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, Marshall really touched on all of it. DC is, the same feedback. You know, in March, it was interesting. In March and April, the feedback was the consensus was, oh my gosh, landlords are totally unwilling. And when the question was asked, have you reached out or talked to them? It was an overwhelming no as well. So what was first and foremost in terms of a recommendation is you have to have a relationship. Like if you never had a relationship with your landlord, anything and everything that can be done to have a relationship, it's important. Now, mind you, there are definitely landlords and companies that have no interest in having that relationship. And they are the ones that, although the anomaly, that have been ghost. Like the questions come in, are you willing? Can you help? And they don't respond. But the majority, to Marshall's point, have been very accommodating, have been very willing. I'm not saying that it's not an issue, it's a big issue, but I think the bigger issue is the mentality around when you lose, we lose, when you win, we win. And that's what does not exist with the landlord tenant relationship. So maybe going forward, there could be more conversations where the tenant feels empowered to say, no, as we rethink or go forward, let's create, to Marshall's point, a contract that really works so that when I'm winning, you're actually making way more than what you anticipated. When I'm losing, you are leading compassionately and managing compassionately. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area, but I think big lesson learned is know your lease and know your landlord.
Well put. Yep.
Thank you. So let's talk about brighter days ahead. So the vaccine's coming. So again, how do we position our industry so that they are in line to be protected? Would you say that restaurant workers are second responders, frontline workers? How do we position us so that we get our share? Marshall, you want to start?
From the very beginning, when restaurant employees and restaurants were deemed as an essential service, we realized that somewhere down the road, the vaccine is going to be important for our industry. So as part of the National Restaurant Association's blueprint for recovery, we have in there, the request, or at least the education that lawmakers need to see, that those making decisions, that our employees are on the front lines of dealing with people day in and day out. And if this is indeed a virus that spreads by just being around others, that our industry has to be considered at the top of the list. I don't think anyone's going to argue with our healthcare professionals being first and foremost. Of course, obviously, first responders, obviously, these nursing home, all makes a lot of sense. But once you get beyond there, I'm an office employee here at the Restaurant Association. I'm clearly less important than the hostess that is seating people day in and day out, or the servers, or the bartenders. And we all want to get to the point where we can just go to the bar and have a drink without a mask on and be able to have a friendly conversation with someone we don't know next to us, or with the bartender or our server. We all want to get to that point, and they do too. So we really play a critical role in society. So I think that needs to be reinforced, that restaurants are the backbone of every neighborhood and community, and we're part of this society and the fabric of everyday life. We need to be taken into serious consideration and allow these vaccines to be made available to us as part of the first grouping.
So Kathy, how do we influence our employees to get the vaccine if they're offered it?
Well, I mean, that's a much trickier question because we're still trying to gauge their interest and appetite to come back to work, right? So I would say that it's twofold, but to Marshall's point, listen, we are essential businesses. They are essential employees. We've been deemed essential, so we should be treated that way. in terms of the protections that are needed. I think that the bigger conversation with the employees is going to be around workforce and what we want this workforce to be as we move forward. Part of rebuilding the workforce is to do it in a way that protects you as employees and gives the small business community what they need to be able to recover for that municipality. I mean, we are a key ingredient as an industry to the recovery of our local economy. We are job creators. We hire a lot of people. We feed a lot of people. We service a lot of people. And we support businesses that also are key to making sure that a restaurant is successful. So the arguments are there. The blueprint that the National Restaurant Association very clearly states the rationale around prioritization of our industry and its employees. But it's tricky. It's like talking to your family about vaccinations, right? I have a family where everyone in my family except myself, they're physicians, and they all have very different philosophies, let alone a restaurant operator who is talking to their employees as they're trying to bring them back. That is going to be challenging, but it's going to require a lot of really good collaborative education, coupled with science and data that hopefully we're getting from economists as well as health professionals to help us with that argument. But we need to be prioritized as an industry. And the sooner that people understand that recovery, we are a part of that formula on a very basic level, we have to be an industry that is able to come back in the best way possible to at least allow for the reset that is needed going forward.
I wonder if that's going to be the new certification. We're 100% vaccinated. This restaurant's 100% free, so. Yeah, I think it's going to be an issue because not everybody is going to want to take that risk, and not everyone trusts the medical profession. And so, I think it's going to be a big issue moving forward. I heard a good idea today, and that is, rather than mandate, and I don't know if an employer can actually mandate someone to take a vaccine, but strongly suggest that you do, or else we need you to be tested every week for you to work. And that probably is an alternative that probably is a mid-ground. You don't force anybody to do anything, but it's a middle ground. So what do you think about that?
I think that has to happen.
Right.
I mean, I think we can look at what's happening with schools, right? I mean, there's the independent school community that has one thinking in terms of hybrid learning, whether that's DC or elsewhere. But that's the reality, is that testing has to happen every week. I mean, you have to have some level of controls in place to be able to at least prevent the community spread risk, right?
Right.
But Marshall, I don't know what you think about this. It's a tricky one, and when it comes to employees, but I think it has to be an either or. You have the option of getting vaccinated or to ensure that your colleagues around you and the workers around you are safe. You're agreeing to do these three things. I mean, that's a part of being socially and community responsible, right?
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think you just said it, being responsible. And I think that all restaurateurs do feel responsible for their employees, and they treat them like family. And I think the lesson that we should all have learned by now, and we can thank our elected officials for showing us the way not to communicate to one another. We have received so much conflicting information, whether it be within jurisdictions, in a state, federal, I mean, just from every level. Most of the issues we have, and people not being able to get on board around one thing, or at least a thing of some kind, or have an agreement, is because we've had a lack of good communication and honesty about what the options are, what the expectations are, and, what we're thinking. And so I think it's very important that, as restaurants, you start thinking about that today. When we get to the point when a vaccine is available, how am I going to handle it with my employees? What is that communication plan going to look like? And, regardless of what you decide, I think the communication and the reasoning behind that, those things is going to be important. And getting the buy-in from your employees because they feel like it's all been laid out, it's been communicated clearly, and they understand the why, I think it will go a long way to getting everybody on board. But you can't just show up to work on, February 1st and be ready to go with that. I think some planning needs to take place. And I think those operators that are able to do that will be 10 times more successful than somebody from, some office somewhere just making a decision and saying, this is the way it has to be done. And one of your assistant managers just saying, well, this is what the boss said and it's the way that it is. That kind of communication cannot happen. And it needs to be, thought about in advance and come from one person, whoever that person is.
Yes, Marshall, it's interesting as you were saying that, it made me think about the fact that we hear and have heard for years and years and years how while restaurants are so great at immediate pivots, they never have the luxury of time to plan for anything. And part of that is that they're not even wired to think that way, right? They're just not wired to think that way. Many are not, because they don't have the luxury of thinking that way to plan. But to your point, let's all assume that our industry is going to be given priority. Let's all assume that we are going to be one of the first to be offered vaccination. How are you as an operator really thinking about the planning of that and the execution of that for your teams? And while it won't happen tomorrow, you actually have a couple months that you can, at minimum, a couple months to think about what your plan is. And I think that's genius, and it's so simple, but it's so underrated because we never have the luxury of time to plan for anything, let alone the ingredient that we may need last minute because of a big catering order, right? I mean, it's just so interesting to me because let's take that silver lining and create plans, programs, contingency plans, all of it.
Right. Very good. So, so some of the models that have been successful throughout this is obviously carry out and delivery. And I think, Kathy, you've been intimately involved with delivery fees, influencing the government to limit delivery fees. I think you've been successful. And so where are we? I mean, that is a booming, there are winners and losers from this pandemic. The delivery companies have been the winners. How does that look 6 months to a year from now as to who has got the leverage in the supply chain to control that cost?
Yeah, it's a similar conversation to the landlord-tenant relationship going forward. I will say that the third-party delivery caps in the immediate of what we needed in March and April, and I mean, that was very real, just a need to pause, just to allow as much cash and dollars and revenue or any cash on hand to remain in the house. That was really the intent, is with all of what is happening, we can't have so much money leaving the restaurant. However, we do know that it's balanced with a real need. I mean, takeout and delivery is really the lifeblood of the operations right now. So I am not trying to paralyze the business model of third-party delivery that works very well for our industry. I'm hoping that rather than any legislative mandate going forward, again, that there's a real willingness and dialogue with these companies that rely on us and we rely on them. I think that that's going to be key. And I'm committed to that. I will tell you that many times it's the elected officials that are really pushing the caps going forward or even lowering it below what it currently has been lowered to. So explaining that they might leave a market or this would really paralyze a restaurant long term, that's the bigger challenge. But I think the good news is, and Marshall, you've been a part of these conversations and calls, there seems to be a dialogue now with the third party delivery that they want to find ways to have a win-win. And we just have to, both sides have to really commit to making that happen, because we're going to need one another going forward. And there doesn't need to be this thinking that all of the revenue needs to be made by a third party delivery during this time, during the pandemic. It's how are we working together going into the years ahead, where we know this is a big part of consumer behavior now. How are we working together so that you are still financially robust as a company and the restaurant operator doesn't feel so taxed financially pushing out this service? Marshall, I don't know if you have anything to add there, but it's become a more interesting conversation as we've gone through the months.
Yes, it has. And your point that it's a business relationship similar to, your landlord, and the conversations need to happen. That's the way this should be treated as well. And so if we go back prior to this pandemic starting, the rates that these third-party delivery companies were charging, people were willing to pay them, and they signed up and they participated. And just like your rent, if you're willing to pay rent in a certain location because you can make it work on the amount of sales you're going to do, then it's less of a problem. But obviously, with all of these, traumatic things happening, that changed the landscape. So instead of moving forward with legislative solutions to this, the RAM board of directors met and discussed this and talked about it, and they felt that the best course of action for every operator was to have a conversation with their third-party delivery provider and to renegotiate or change the landscape, or if you felt strongly that it was just too onerous, maybe go to a different one, or just don't do that altogether. But we were really concerned with wanting a legislative solution to this issue, because the reality is, Kathy and I spend almost every day of our waking lives trying to keep government out of your businesses.
Yep. Yep.
So how can we, in good conscience, say to government now's the time we want you to come in and regulate fees and this and that and the other thing. We weren't willing to do that. So from our perspective, we never advocated for any of these policies. And then Kathy mentioned it, because they did something out west and it caught a little bit of traction. Some lawmakers wanted to do those things here. And I had to have a very frank conversation with a staffer for an elected official in Baltimore City and remind them that Baltimore City is not San Francisco. It's not. It is not the same. There is the demand for these is not the same. The income, the demographics, all the different, so you couldn't just take something that was done out west and plant it here because you thought it was a good idea. Mm-hmm. So, it's part of a larger conversation of, that we all need to have. And, that's why we just never really got on board with a legislative solution to that. And we have plenty of operators that have been able to, work things out and been able to move forward. But admittedly, here in Maryland, we have plenty of jurisdictions and counties where these third-party deliveries are just not really applicable. They're not something our membership is concerned about. So, that's, it's not something that needs to be watched. I think there will be a reset in that industry over time as well. They'll realize we're in a different place and can't We're going to lose restaurants if we continue to charge such high fees. And the market will take care of itself, I'm sure.
So I just wanted to, we're going to wrap up, but it is interesting though that I think carry-out containers and how that whole industry has blossomed, how we're getting a lot better at moving product to the consumer in the state that they want to eat it. I think I'm so fascinated. I think we probably carry out 5 days a week, my wife and I see every kind of container, and I get the hot French fries and I get the cold French fries. I get the, the soaking wet something and things that are well, it's so fascinating to me. I never really had an interest in paper goods, but now I do, because I think it's a really important piece of the supply chain now. The delivery options, and what I see now is online order entry from the restaurant is just, it is getting so good. And when you have a bad online order entry and a good one. And I saw today, actually, when I carry out for lunch, that the restaurant had 2 options for your delivery option. So now you can choose which one. And both were not the national players, they were local players. So I think the barriers of entry for delivery is a lot lower than, let's say, being a landlord. And so you're having the proliferation of local delivery options. And you also have now with online order entry, competitors that the consumer can pick who they want to deliver their product, which will, again, the marketplace will take over. So I think that that's a good thing. Yeah. I do have a question from one of the audience, and that is, I know Kathy's been dealing with this, is, okay, so we had outdoor dining and now we have tents and now it's getting cold. And at what point does outdoor dining become indoor dining with a tent? And I saw all these regulations that DC was wrangling with. So Kathy, you want to tackle that for
oh my gosh, that is like the tenting. So what I will say is that you have the tenting allowances and you have the heater allowances. But if you combine them, you're going to have 7,500 questions. So yeah, it's not ideal in DC. If you have a tent and you want to heat that tent, you have to have all flaps up. And there has to be clearance between the heater and the ceiling and the sides. Now, what distinguishes indoor versus outdoor? The city would say that what distinguishes indoor and outdoor is the number of flaps that are down. So as we head into 25% occupancy mid-December, which we're a little bit behind the rest of the region on that, but if we get to that point where we're 25% occupancy mid-December, if you have an outdoor tent that does not have the open air, it's going to be considered outdoor dining and treated, it's going to be considered indoor dining and treated that way, where you can only seat 25% of the occupancy. My thinking is with the winter months and DC, if you want to do outdoor dining, it should be outdoor dining. Put heaters, make it outdoor. Yes, have some coverage for rain or weather, but it's outdoor dining. People are going to bundle up, be close to a fire pit, be close to a heater, but you can't recreate indoor dining and A, have it heated outside, or B, have people seated. Because if indoor dining goes away completely, all of your outdoor dining that resembles indoor dining is gone. That sounded like a tongue twister, but the point is that it's very complex. It sounds like it could be very helpful. It hasn't been super helpful. And as the months get colder, people are going to have to make decisions about tenting or heating. It's one or the other.
Marshall?
Yeah, we have similar things here. Every jurisdiction's a little bit different, but the reason we have outdoor dining prior to COVID was so that people could enjoy the nice weather outside. Nobody in their mind decided we're going to create outdoor dining for the months of December, January, and February before COVID. That was nobody thought that way. And I get it. We're desperate. We're trying to, every nuance and squeeze everything we can. But I would caution people and say the reality is that outdoor dining does not exist for the next 3 months. It just can't. Maybe we get a beautiful January weekend where it gets up to 65 degrees and, we'll get the snowstorm 4 days after that, or, but, we may get lucky. But to plan on some type of consistent outdoor dining for the next, 3, maybe even 4 months, is probably going to, it's just not going to pan out the way that you would hoped. I would suggest, and this isn't something that we announce as like formal advice, it would just be a suggestion that I would have, is that instead of putting that time and energy and maybe even money into trying to create outdoor dining spaces that'll work over the next 3 months, to put that time, energy, money into ways to figure out how to make your takeout business better and to grow it. Because here's a reality. We have all now been trained to get takeout from restaurants that historically we weren't used to getting takeout from. And I think the consumer is going to want that a little bit more in the future than they did pre-COVID. So it's going to be a significant segment of your business moving forward. And I'm talking about every restaurant, even you fine dining folks. There are ways that people will like a take-home package of 4 from a fine dining steakhouse where they can grill at home and whatever the case might be. I think that's probably a better way to think about bringing some revenue in, because the reality is most of us are not going to be willing to sit out in the cold, no matter how much it's heated. And you are going to run into the problems of, if you put a side down on a tent, all of a sudden it's indoor dining and now you're stuck with that. So it's a lot to think about, and it's just not a crystal clear answer that you should just run up and put up a tent, because it just may not work out the way you had hoped.
Well, Kathy, Marshall, thank you very much. Do you have any closing comments?
I don't. I think that, I do feel that we're kind of in the 7th or 8th inning. So that seems a little bit more hopeful. I think we've been through some of the worst of it, but we are going to get through it. And this industry is amazing, and we've all come together, and we just have to stay together to get through the other side.
Yeah, I would agree. It's, restaurateurs are the most resilient group of people, and their businesses are resilient because they have resilient employees. And I think that the more that we just kind of hang in there, and yes, we all are going to feel some pain. Every business segment is feeling it. But we need to do whatever we can to get to the other side of this. And it's really going to be exciting, even though it's tough to be excited about anything right now. But for the first time in probably decades, we're going to have a change in our industry that's going to draw a lot more people into our industry. It's going to have new thoughts and the ways of doing things, and that's kind of exciting. And I think that's for all of us to kind of keep an eye out for and to be part of. And the resiliency is going to see its way through. So for everyone on the call, I say this every day, just try to hang in there. Just try to hang in there one more week. We get it. We'll try to be there for you. And when we come out on the other side, just think about how much more we're going to really enjoy going out to eat.
Well, thank you so much for being here, both of you. We're going to post a blog on savalfoods.com with all the links for RAM and RAMW. And to all our customers, I thank you for joining us today. I hope you find the Megabytes Showcase to be a good resource, an opportunity for savings. We all need to get some savings. And tomorrow we'll have live chats with our suppliers open from 2 to 4 p.m. And we'll have the showcase open as a resource through Thursday, December 11th. So thank you very much. Have good holidays if I don't talk to you. And thanks again for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.